Hi, I'm Clemens, and this talk is called Cleaning Up Your Project. I'm a freelance developer from Vienna, and I mainly work with JavaScript and a little bit of Ruby, but today I promise you all code samples will be JavaScript only. When we say cleaning up code, we could mean two things. We could actually mean making code clean, like in a way that it's more readable, nicer to work with, or throwing away unused code, and this talk will be about the second point. So, the first step to cleaning your project is actually making your project cleanable, because otherwise you might break your project very soon. And the first thing I really consider important when cleaning up a project or making a project cleanable is to make explicit what your dependencies of a piece of code are. So since a few years, fortunately, we've got this little import statement in JavaScript, or a whole module system. Before that, it was more like we had a few script tags for every library in our browser, and they all lived happily together in the global namespace. And actually, this import statement is super handy when you want to clean up code, because when you look at a module or something, at a class, at a file, it's immediately visible what are the functionalities or what external functionality this depends upon. So the second tip that I could give you is fail in your project as early as possible. So when something goes wrong during your cleanup, you want to notice it soon. You've probably heard of compile time and of runtime. You probably haven't heard of startup time, because I made that term up. What I mean by it is when you start your application and you open it, that's actually startup time. So it's not during user interaction or something that happens later on, but during the boot process of your application, kind of. So when you clean up your project, it's actually important that some failures because of missing dependencies and stuff like that occur at compile time or at startup time. Because if you get errors at runtime, it usually means you get errors in production, and it usually means you're not the first one who sees the error, but your users are. So I prepared a little piece of code to show you how it should be done. What was cool about it is that it uses this import statement. So this means when we throw away this super tool, we remove it from our package.json. Then actually, when we compile our project with Webpack, for example, this will already fail, because it tells us, I don't know what this super tool is, I can't find it anywhere. If we don't have this import statement, like because super tool was included with a script tag and it lives in the global scope, then this code would fail at startup time, because this class statement is interpreted as soon as the source file is read, right? So that's also okay-ish. But what's really bad is if we have this code and super tool is just referenced somewhere in your function, because then you're just going to notice that there's something missing when this function gets invoked for the first time at runtime. This is a little collection of super fancy stuff that I did in my former projects, because I thought they are really clean and it's a really nice way of doing it. It's not. The first thing is, actually it was a Ruby example, and it's a little bit contrived here, but I did some kind of interpolation of a variable into some kind of module name, because I had several modules following a naming convention, and depending on the type of use case, I would somehow use the differently named module. So what's the problem with this? Well, when I clean up a project, I usually would do, before removing a class, I would do a project-wide search for the class name, right? So I would see all occurrences. The problem is I wouldn't find this statement, because it doesn't mention the class name. It's just some string concatenation resulting in the class name at runtime. So for cleanup, this is absolutely worthless. And the second one is from a recent project, so actually a project I'm still working on, where we had some kind of game logic in a mobile app, and depending on the game stage that you were in, it would require a certain SVG icon. And we thought, okay, we save ourselves a few imports, and we don't import all of these SVGs for every stage separately because it's really repetitive and we want to be as dry as possible, right? So I interpolated the stage number. And as things go, usually at a certain point, certain things disappear out of no reason. And in our error handling or error tracking tool, I saw statements like cannot find module icons 7.svg or something like that. So this error was already in production, and in fact I really could have saved our users from experiencing this missing icon by just importing all of the SVGs separately, because then Webpack would already complain at compile time when it can't find one of these assets that it wants to import. Yeah, this is probably something very important to me, at least. I like automated testing, and it's a very, very handy tool for refactorings or code cleanups, because this way you can verify, even when you don't delete entire modules and your build informs you that a module is missing. It could also be that you're just deleting a little piece of functionality and that breaks something. And that's actually what your tests will catch if they cover most of your functionality. So the cool thing about unit and integration tests is that they are usually very small, very little in scope, and they execute really fast. So you could just run them easily after every little change you make. And ideally, if you did something wrong, it would inform you immediately and you could undo the action. And system tests, which, for example, click through the whole application and test entire user paths, are really useful after doing an entire cleanup session, because this way you can make sure that the whole system still works. But tests also need to be cleaned up. So for example, when you delete a piece of code and the test fails, it could be because of two reasons. First reason, you messed something up. Second reason, the test is still testing the code that you removed. So in this case, you actually have to check if it's a real failure or if you just have to delete the test as well. Another thing that helps very much is creating meaningful commits in your repository. I like to commit at the earliest time possible where I have a coherent functionality implemented, because then it's also really easy to find a good commit message which describes this one thing that I did with this commit. And the cool thing about this is, for example, in my editor, I see on the focused line who changed this line last and what was the commit message. So when I clean up and I'm unsure, okay, what's actually the intention of this line of code, I have immediately the context in which it was created or at least modified. I could jump to this commit and see not only this single line of code or this change, but all the other changes that were done in this one implementation session. So this gives me a lot of information if this code is actually still needed or not. Yeah, another question is that we prepared our project for cleanup, how to actually clean it up. There are several tools out there for special tasks like finding unused CSS selectors or whatever. So for every language, there are little tools. But in general, the best tools are an IDE and linter, because they make it easy to navigate around your project, like jump to the definition of a class or a function. And they also highlight unused variables, so you could also just see what can be deleted easily. And as I mentioned before, project-wide search. When you clean up code, it's actually a good idea to follow paths of your code. For example, when you want to delete a function, you could also follow all of the functions that get called within that function to see if they are used somewhere else, because if they aren't, you could also delete this referenced function, right? So actually, you could do a whole cascade of cleanups by just removing one piece of code. When you clean up code, it's important to move in small iterations. So I usually like to delete just a single function or even a single variable or a single file. And then I run, for example, the Webpack build again to see if it is broken or not. Or I run my unit tests to see if the functionality still works. And then I keep repeating and deleting the next stuff. So I'm not at one point overwhelmed with all the 5,000 error messages I receive. And yeah, what's also important is not to over clean up. Sometimes I'm a little bit ambitious when I do cleanups, and this could actually end up in a huge rabbit hole, which takes you like 5 times more time than you wanted to invest in. And I like to focus on the low-hanging fruits there. We heard today in a previous talk that we shouldn't focus on the low-hanging fruits, but I still do. And yeah, because focusing on the low-hanging fruits actually turns out to fulfill this Pareto principle that 80% of the work can be achieved with 20% of the time investment, and the remaining 20% would actually consume 80% of your time, roughly. So that's about it. I thank you very much. I like talking to nice people, so if you consider yourself nice, come talk to me afterwards. And yeah, you can also follow me on Twitter. Then I can keep you updated on stuff I like.
Thank you. This conference has been gradually getting better for me. The quality of the lineup is usually really, really good, and this is something I'm really saying thumbs up.
They're really trying to get speakers here that are pushing to the future of web technologies.
I just feel like it's a very community-driven conference. It also has a lot of quality, and people are just nice. Hi, my name is Sarah, and this is AgentConf in Dornbirn.
Amazing venue. Austria is beautiful. Meeting all of the people in the community and getting to go and hang out and ski.